which was truly a one of the biggest educational experiences for me, to look at an alternative way of how we could change the way the U.S. operates, that would make it much more humane, much more just, and less exploitive of the general population. But as most of you may know, Cuba has been a country that the United States has pretty much economically done everything it possibly could to undermine the economy of Cuba, as well as it spent a lot of energy in trying to sabotage the government. I believe there were records of over 600 times he tried to kill Fidel Castro. But yet you saw, or at least I saw when I was there in 1971, people working together not only to improve the situation in Cuba, but they had solidarity efforts for the people of Vietnam. They had solidarity efforts for people out of Angola, out of South Africa, out of Guinea-Bissau and the Cape Verde Islands, out of Mozambique. In fact, there were students from those countries, people who had joined the liberation movement and needed to have additional education. Cuba opened its doors to those movements to train people how to become future diplomats, to train people about basic economics and about banking and things along that line. That there were people from liberation struggles from all over the world that came to Cuba to study. And while I was there, I was fortunate enough to meet a number of them. I never forget, there was a meeting that we had with the people from Southeast Asia, Vietnam, and they showed a film of Vietnamese who had shot down a U.S. aircraft. And some of the people from the United States in the audience cheered when they saw the aircraft go down. And it really took the Vietnamese people back a bit, because they kind of stopped the film and they said, look, we have no pleasure in killing people who have been sent to kill us. We feel it's our obligation to defend our sovereignty, and that we will do. But we do not celebrate the killing of individuals that virtually had no control over the fact of where they went to fight a war.
Particularly at that time, because there was the draft was there.
That was rated. I mean, we're talking 71, when the war was hot and heavy, and it was a great educational experience for most of the people in that room to see that the Vietnamese people were not having pleasure out of shooting down people from the United States that were in Vietnam.
And so it's such a sad case of affairs, Bob, because to this day we still see men wearing their Vietnam veteran hats with pride. And I'm like, I don't understand. Like, there was guilty of war crimes
Yes.
well, in all wars, but particularly that one. And it was a war of aggression, and a war they didn't win. So where's the pride in all of that?
Well, you also find that you have Vietnam vets against the war. People who actually participated in that war and recognized the mistake of being sent over to Vietnam to attack people in their own country who only wanted to live their own lives. And I often ask people to think about the fact that one of the major weapons that was used in the Vietnam War was Agent Orange. Agent Orange was a herbicide. And I found out with a little bit of research that before the United States got involved with the war in Vietnam, 2/3 of all of the world's export of rice came out of Southeast Asia. By the end of the war, the United States was the largest exporter of rice in the world.
Little known history fact there.
Right, so it's kind of like an economic piece in there.
Yeah.
That the United States did not want Southeast Asia to benefit from its ability to grow rice. And I think that had played a major role in why they used so much Agent Orange in Southeast Asia to destroy their ability to continue to be a major producer of rice around the world.
That is the type of insight that is needed, and quite frankly, why I'm grateful to have this conversation with you today as we discuss the rise and fall of TransAfrica and the legacy of Randall Robinson. TransAfrica started here in Washington, D.C., I believe it was 77, the year it was in its inception, and it grew to become an international renowned organization, and its greatest accomplishment for all intents and purposes was the fall of apartheid in South Africa. But some would even say that that accomplishment is also one of the things that caused the decline of TransAfrica, because it seems to me that it sounds just like what happened with Mumia Abu-Jamal's case when he was the most famous death row inmate, and the world was rallying around that, trying to stop him from being executed. When they succeeded in getting him off death row, they was like, "Oh, we won." And his real supporters like, "No, he's unjustly incarcerated," But he lost like half of his support. The Mumia Abu campaign was deflated simply because he was taken off death row. So the accomplishment actually hurt the momentum of the movement. So I'm wondering if the same thing is applicable to TransAfrica by the dismantling of apartheid in South Africa. Oh, there's no other travesties of the African diaspora that meets that level. So I think that they lost a lot of support. You can push back on how well that rings with you, but I wanted to start
Well,
there.
one of the things that I wanted to bring up about Randall
Hold that up, so we gotta get.
was that he didn't start.
Pull your mic up, because we got.
One of the things I wanted to bring up about Randall was he did not start off talking about Africa around TransAfrica. Randall participated with a number of people who ended up being on the board of TransAfrica with the Pan-African Congress that took place in Tanzania. And that he himself had spent time in Tanzania years before even TransAfrica came about. And that, and so he had familiarized himself with Africa, and I think that's what got him to recognize the importance of getting involved with the anti-apartheid struggle, was the experience he had in East Africa and Tanzania. And I think that what we have to, when we look at Randall, we have to look at the struggle he went through, I'm sure, with growing up around Richmond, Virginia, and the segregation that he probably grew up under in Richmond, Virginia. And he had a brother that was quite well known,
Max Robinson,
who actually was, and to my knowledge, the first black anchor for a major network.
I believe so.
News has on ABC that Max made himself into the position of the anchor for ABC News every night. And so people saw this black face of a man who was very articulate and was sharing the news. And so Randall himself, after coming back from Africa, ended up working for Congressman Diggs, who was believed based out of Detroit. And Congressman Diggs had actually had a reputation of, again, focusing around the issues of Africa. And that Randall kind of became his point staff person to help do the research on pieces of legislation that Congressman Diggs pushed out of the Congress around issues dealing with Africa itself. And so Randall played that role as well. And I believe Randall had a law degree, which gave him the ability to be much better equipped through the legal writings of legislation that became important, that came out of Congressman Diggs' office. Of course, eventually Congressman Diggs had a lot of pressure put upon him. And I think for two reasons. One was that, in fact, he became a little bit too effective in getting pieces of legislation that other members of Congress didn't want to get passed. And secondly, that he was accused of certain improprieties as a congressperson. I don't know finances of how he spent his money as a congressman. And so pretty much he ended up getting pushed off of Capitol Hill right around the time, a little bit after the time Trans-Africa actually got started. In fact, in 1975, I moved back from Florida, back up here to Washington, D.C., because I had been asked by the ANC and SWAPO and the Patriotic Front, in particular ZAPU, to help start an anti-apartheid movement. To not help start it because the anti-apartheid movement had already started, but to help build the anti-apartheid movement here in the United States. And I had moved down in '72 to Florida to work with the United Farm Workers Union. And one of the things I learned about the United Farm Workers Union was that the farm workers found very quickly that if they wanted to get popular support for their struggle, they had to educate the general public what it meant to be a migrant farm worker. And so they literally took migrant farm workers out of the field and sent them to the major cities around the country to tell their story as to what it was like to be a migrant farm worker and how the growers abused them as workers. And that's what built the popular support for the United Farm Workers Union and built the support for the boycott on grapes, and later the boycott on lettuce, and even later than that, the boycotts on grapes again. And when I went to work for the Farm Workers Union in Florida, we had organized a union contract with Minute Maid Orange Juice, which was the third largest orange juice producer in the United States at the time. So I'm coming back from being down there for 3 years, working with migrant farm workers, and I dare say I had a tremendous experience of learning a lot from the people I work with in the Farm Workers Union, including that of Cesar Chavez and Dolores Werder and Mac Lyons and Dinah Lyons.
All-star lineup right there.
I'm sorry?
That was an all-star lineup. Those heavy hitters' names just dropped right there.
And so one of the advantages I had was that whenever Cesar came into the state of Florida, I was always assigned to be with him. And so when we had downtime, we spent a lot of time just discussing different issues. And I took that opportunity to get his viewpoints on what it took to build that organization and why they did things the way they did it. And one thing became clear, that if you want to change U.S. policy, one of the ways you do it is you get the people of the United States aware of either the positive or negative aspects of the U.S. policy. Because the thing is like someone who has cancer. If you don't know you have cancer, you're not going to do anything about your cancer. And so one of the things the Farm Workers Union recognized it had to do was go out to the public and educate them on what it meant to be a micro farm worker and the ways that these corporate growers took advantage of micro farm workers. And one of the most interesting things at that time in the state of Florida was most of the micro farm workers were former sharecroppers coming out of the South. And so the majority of micro farm workers in the state of Florida at that time were African Americans, coming out of Mississippi, coming out of Georgia, coming out of Alabama, and coming out of many of those different communities. And down to the mechanization of agriculture in the South, they no longer were needed as sharecroppers, and so they ended up becoming a part of the migratory farm workers stream that would work in Florida during late fall, winter, early spring, and then follow the migratory stream all the way up to New York and Michigan from the spring through the summer and fall, and then come back down to Florida and work again from fall all the way up to spring again. And so 55% of the micro farm workers in the state of Florida at that time were African Americans. Another 35% of them were Latinos, mostly from Mexico. And then you had about another 10% of those workers actually were white farm workers who had been pushed off the farms out of South Carolina, out of Georgia, out of Alabama. And it was interesting watching the dynamics between the three different ethnic groups that made up those micro farm workers. But I'm getting a little bit off of Randall. But the point was, I learned a lot from that experience. And when I was asked by the ANC to help start the anti-apartheid movement, I agreed and moved back up here. And I recognized at that point, if we were going to build a movement around apartheid, the first thing we had to do was educate the public as to what apartheid was. And so one of the first part of community I went to were the colleges and universities. And I was surprised that you would have political science students in the mid-70s that did not know what the word apartheid meant, had never heard of the word apartheid. And some of these students were graduate students in political science. And so it was quite interesting to note how the U.S. Pick and choose what information they even teach on a university level as to what's going on in the world. And obviously, if you didn't know the system worked, then how would you have an opinion on it? And so what ended up happening was that when I moved up here, I had been out of the area for 3 years. One of the first things that was said to me was that I needed to meet with Randall Robinson. I needed to meet with a number of the church women that worked out of the different national church organizations, the Presbyterian, United Methodist, etc., who had been doing work around Southern Africa because I'm the new man on the block. And I needed to introduce who I was to them. So before I came in here and just started working around
Protocol.
Yes, and so I ended up having luncheon with a number of the women leaders, as well as I ended up meeting Randall and sharing with him my thoughts and ideas. But one big advantage I did have was that I had access to the UN representatives and members of the Central Committee of the African National Congress, members of the Central Committee of SWAPO, and members of the Central Committee of one of the two parties in Zimbabwe, which was at the time ZAPU. And so it allowed me to get a lot of information from the horse's mouth as to what was actually going on in their particular country. And it helped me a great deal because I could then set up speaking engagements on college campuses. And I could invite representatives from those movements to come speak on those college campuses, and I let them speak about what was happening in their country. And I would speak about U.S. foreign policy. That way they would not be accused of messing with internal affairs of the United States. And it worked out well because they were there to answer the questions that people may have had about what was it like living in Zimbabwe at that time called Rhodesia, or what was it like living in Namibia, which was controlled by the apartheid regime in South Africa.
I'm sorry, just the caucasity, that's the word we use for calling the African nation Rhodesia. You know, I mean, like, that's probably the whitest African nation name I've ever heard of, and we still get people.
Well, it was named after Cecil Rhodes.
Yeah, and we still got people walking around proudly declaring themselves as Rhodes scholars.
Right.
You know, I just want to put a shout out to that because that burns me. But sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
And so, when we started the anti-apartheid movement in USA, Trans-Africa had not started, and one of the events that happened in South Africa was the Soweto uprising, where the government of South Africa made the decision that the only language that the students in the schools, the black students in the schools of Soweto could study was the language of Afrikaans, that they no longer could be taught English at all, that they had to be taught the language of the apartheid regime of Afrikaans. And students rejected that idea. And on June 16, 1976, they went out in a demonstration to challenge it. And when they did that demonstration, the police department came out in force with their guns and literally shot down and killed about 1,000 students.
This was the Sharpeville massacre?
No, this was the Soweto.
Soweto.
The Soweto
There's more massacres.
Yes, Sharpeville massacre happened in 1960.
Oh, wow.
Okay, but this happened in 1976, June 16, 1976. And at that time, the organization that I was heading up, the Anti-Apartheid Movement USA, was the only organization in Washington, D.C. focused around apartheid in Southern Africa. As I said at the time, Randall was still working on Capitol Hill. There were efforts being made to put together Trans-Africa, but at that point, Trans-Africa as an entity did not exist. And so many of the people who ended up being on the board of Trans-Africa came to my office, which was located down off of Georgia Avenue, right across from Howard University.
Not far from where we are now.
Correct. And they they came in and they said, we got to respond to this. And they chose to come to our office because we were the only ones focused at that point, as I said before, around the issues of Southern Africa and South Africa. And in our name, we were the Anti-Apartheid Movement USA. So we formulated a coalition called the June 16th Coalition. And within 2 weeks, we organized a demonstration that started up at Malcolm X Park and ended up at the South African Embassy. And literally we had hundreds of people who came together at that demonstration to express our support for those students and against the South African regime. And from that point, it was kind of like the wake-up point for a lot of people who at that point still didn't know what the word apartheid meant, because it wasn't something that was often talked about in the news media at all. And that's how I got to meet a number of the people who ended up being on the board of Trans-Africa. For example, Sylvia Hill had been one of the major organizers of the coalition, the June 16th coalition, that got started at the office that the anti-apartheid movement had here on Georgia Avenue. You had Jimmy Garrett, was another person. You had Sandra Hill, another person that worked closely with Trans-Africa once Trans-Africa began, but at that point Trans-Africa did not exist. As you mentioned, Trans-Africa started around 1977, which was about a year later.
But it was preceded by the Soweto massacre. So you saying that because of that atrocity that was committed there, that got people up in arms to do something, that was the...
Well, yes. What happened was that there were people who were aware of apartheid, and I think were actively involved in the formation of Trans-Africa. But at that point, Trans-Africa didn't exist. And so as they were preparing for launching off Trans-Africa itself, the South African regime decided to attack these school kids and kill about 1,000 of them, which for the first time was forced to be on the front page of the Washington Post, and something that the major networks had to talk about. I mean, how do you have 1,000 kids that were between the age of elementary school and high school get killed, and you don't talk about it? So they were forced to talk about it, and that gave a platform for people to begin to start talking about apartheid and really begin to help people better understand what was really going on. Of course, at that time, just about every major U.S. corporation were heavily invested in apartheid. You had everybody from General Motors to Xerox that had large plants inside of South Africa and making a lot of money because they were using the cheap labor of the African laborers inside of South Africa to sell their products throughout Africa and throughout other parts of the world.
So Trans-Africa came about a year later.
Yes, it officially began about a year later. They had been working on Trans-Africa in '76, but it was not officially an organization. In fact, at that time, Randall was still working on Capitol Hill with the Congressman Diggs.
Now, demystify the process for us. How does one go about creating Trans-Africa Foundation? How was it put together, and who funded it to get it off the ground and running?
Yes, that's a very important point. One of the things that Randall did was that you had a number of church organizations that headquartered themselves on what we used to call it the God Box. That's 475 Riverside Drive in New York City, out by not far from the church that Dr. King on April the 4th made the speech.
Yeah, the one that got him taken off the stage.
Right, the one that was 1 year right before he was killed.
That's right,
To the
1
very
year,
day he was
1 year to
killed.
the day. That's where they was throwing up gang signs. Shout out to Dr. Vincent Harding, one of the authors of that speech.
Right. So you had the United Methodist Church in that building. You had the United Presbyterian in that building. You had several major national churches working out that building, and a number of and those churches had several departments. And a number of those departments had to deal with Africa. And most of those church organizations had made commitments to Trans-Africa. as Randall was putting the pieces together for Trans-Africa. And so they became the major funding aspect for Trans-Africa when Trans-Africa actually got started in 1977. But those pieces were being put together right at the time June 16th happened. And so what ended up happening was that Trans-Africa wasn't in a position to take the lead with the demonstration we had here at the June 16th coalition. So what ended up happening is that by far, Randall did the legwork of these different institutions that ended up having the resources to fund an anti-apartheid struggle. And so, since he had done that work before I got in town, I was kind of like in a position of Johnny come lately to go to the same institutions that they had already made their financial commitments to the formation of Trans-Africa itself. You had people like Bill Lucy, who was the Secretary-Treasurer of ASME, American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, as well as the president of the CB2U, the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, who also organized money from the different unions to financially support Trans-Africa. And so clearly, Randall had done that legwork. And so that when Trans-Africa got started, a lot different than the anti-apartheid movement, where I agreed to come and work under a ridiculous salary. But I agreed to it. And I agreed to $10 a week spending money and $25 and $15 a week for food. Fortunately, I'm back up home, so I didn't have to worry about a place to stay. So I basically was operating off of $25 a week as my expenditures, personal expenditures. But then what we did was we did begin to do speaking engagements on college campuses and student organizations. Was able to fund having us come on that campus and talk about apartheid and show films on apartheid. And the fact that I was able to bring in the UN rep from SWAPO, or the UN rep from the ANC, or a member of the Central Committee of the ANC, or one of the members of the Central Committee of the two parties out of Zimbabwe to come speak. Student organizations paid sometimes as much as $1,500 to $2,500 to have us come on the campus, show a film, and answer questions. But one of the constant questions often was asked for the first year or two when we went on the campus was, what was apartheid? They would see the film talking about apartheid and they were like, what's apartheid? And it sounds crazy today for people to thought the people would ask such a question back then. But it showed how little the media chose to talk about apartheid. They kept it off the news. And by keeping it off the news, then people didn't see a reason to have to challenge something they didn't know anything about.
So how did you guys offset that? You said you directly went to the college campuses, started, but when do you think that shift started to turn when it did penetrate America's consciousness?
Well, what happened again, when people actually saw, because this is before you had video, when people actually saw films showing people getting shot down in the streets and showing some of the atrocities happening in South Africa, in Namibia, in Zimbabwe, in Mozambique, in Angola, it became very clear that there was something seriously wrong. And then the question was, what was the role the U.S. was playing there? One of the things people, for example, had to connect dots on was how does a country as small as Portugal, fairly underdeveloped European country, able to control countries 10, 15, 20 times its size, with a population larger than Portugal? Like, how does Portugal afford to do this? Well, what most people didn't understand was that the United States, using the apparatus of NATO as a shield to hide the money that in military equipment and in the military technology and stuff, that the United States aided and abetted Portugal's control over Angola, over Mozambique, over Guinea-Bissau and the Cape Verde Islands, simply by putting it into the NATO budget. And this is something we need to be careful about today, because how the United States finances the NATO budget has a lot to say about what's going on in Africa today. You know, which empowers many of the European countries to be able to super exploit countries throughout Africa with the aid of the United States. This is our tax dollars being used to do this. And of course it's hidden because we're saying we're giving money to NATO as if we're there for money to so-called shield Western Europe. And it's farthest from the truth. I mean, when you look at United States involvement in Afghanistan, in Iraq, you know, a lot of the weaponry and stuff along that line, that money was kind of hidden because the money was given through NATO. And then the European countries that participated in those wars were funded through NATO. And it appeared that the United States wasn't really spending that much money directly in these wars when the money was being spent through NATO. And I advise people to really pay more attention to the NATO budget, because it can explain United States tax dollars being used for some of the egregious crimes against humanity.
What they say, follow the money, honey. This is Come On Freeman, Anchor Black Man Therapy, representing We Act Real, sitting here with the illustrious Paul Pumphrey, Black Alliance for Peace. We're here live at St. Covid Video Booth, Georgia Avenue, across the street from Howard University, on the 40th day Ascension, acknowledging the passing of Randall Robinson, and we're discussing the rise and fall of Trans-Africa and the legacy of Randall Robinson. We talking about, you know, you start penetrating American culture with the apartheid regime in South Africa, Trans-Africa's thrust and the focus. You started penetrating that with the images. What was it that made Trans-Africa's work more effective than the organizations up to that point, and stuff that maybe you was doing up to that point? Because that's what people remember in terms of being the lead advocacy organization that dismantled apartheid in South Africa.
Well, I think one of the things was the fact that Randall had come from Capitol Hill, which was an acceptable place, where I had a history of being a part of the Black Panther Party. I had a history of being with the United Farm Workers Union, and things along that line, which people may not have accepted as much as easily. The fact that he did have financial support from a number of the church organizations, United Presbyterians, United Methodist Church, and of course within these churches you had several different divisions that also contributed. In fact, it was interesting, United Methodist Church, the women in the United Methodist Church asked to be a part of their mission work that they did around the world, in particular in Africa. And the church leadership said that they didn't feel that was a role that women should play.
Patriarchy, can you say patriarchy in the church?
And so what the women did was they said, okay. So they started their own fundraising campaign within inside the United Methodist Church. And they raised more money in the women's organizations across the country in the United Methodist Church than the United Methodist Church had in their budget for the mission work. All of a sudden, United Methodist Church saw the light. Yes, we should invite the women in. Of course, we will invite them in with their money. And so, but if you go to New York today, you have two major entrances inside the UN. You have the delegates entrance, which is on 42nd Street, and you have the main entrance near 47th Street. Right across from the delegates entrance on 42nd Street, you will see a building, I believe it's about 13 or 14 stories high. It's called 777 UN Plaza. That building, which is, like I said, is 13 or 14 stories, is owned by the women's division of the United Methodist Church. It's not owned by the United Methodist Church, it's owned by the women's division of the United Methodist Church. And it's sitting right there across the street from the UN. Okay? It kind of shows the organizing power of the women in the United Methodist Church, that they were able to raise that kind of money to buy that piece of real estate, which now that piece of real estate has to be clearly in the tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, just that one piece of real estate. And so you had organizations within inside of the women's division of the United Methodist Church that worked out of that building that gave support to Trans-Africa. You had the United Presbyterian Church, because if you go down here in Washington, D.C., right across from the Supreme Court building, on Maryland Avenue, you have 100 Maryland Avenue, and you have 120 Maryland Avenue. Again, that's a United Methodist Church building.
And they always have these wonderful progressive slogans outside on their marquee. So shout out to the Methodist Church. I didn't realize until just now how progressive the Methodists are.
Right. And especially, let's not forget the women in the United Methodist Church that helped lead them in that progressive role. And then the fact that they did their own fundraising within inside of the United Methodist Church gave them the independence to even take a more progressive role than the typical male leadership.
So Trans-Africa benefited from the strong foundation of funding from these organizations and outlets. They also benefited from a strong board. They had Randall Robinson also had the support of Danny Glover in the work of Trans-Africa.
Well, let's not forget Harry Belafonte.
And of course, Mr. B, and we're still waiting to hear about his funeral arrangements for Mr. B, because we're gonna definitely crash his funeral. We hope we don't have the same problem with Harry Belafonte's funeral as we had with Coretta Scott King's funeral, when Harry Belafonte was disinvited at the request of George Bush, despite all that he's done for the King family. And then we saw, Bishop Long on stage. We saw so many warmongers there. Not just Bush, it was Kissinger and so. It was just crazy. And if it wasn't for Maya Angelou and I think Reverend Lowry, if I'm not mistaken, there's only like two people spoke out strongly about the fiasco of Coretta Scott King's funeral, as it turned out to be. So hopefully we won't have that same problem with Harry Belafonte's funeral. But yes, so let's talk about that. Harry Belafonte's support for Trans-Africa, Danny Glover, Randall Robinson had some heavy hitters.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And justifiably so, because the cause around fighting against apartheid deserved the support that he got from those heavy hitters. And in fact, this is one of the reasons why I believe that Trans-Africa really became very well known. I found, unfortunately, that the issue around apartheid really did not address the economic question of South Africa. It talked about the race question of South Africa, but the economic piece, it did not really delve into and address as they should have. One of the things that I think that we have to keep in mind is that ever since Nelson Mandela came out of jail, to this day, probably about 70% of the people of African descent in South Africa today still don't have electricity in their homes.
That's criminal. In fact, I would urge anyone that gets the opportunity to look at a map of the globe at night, and it shows the disparity of electricity distribution around the world. And so when they say Africa is the dark continent, that's what they mean, because that is one of the tools of power they use to continue to oppress people. And we need to acknowledge that. So please, why do you think that
Well, one of the things
that was still a case with the
Yeah.
fall of apartheid, and the Truth and Reconciliation Committee never touched on the disparity of redistribution of wealth in South Africa? Do you think that's something that Nelson had to
I
agree
think
to?
one of the things that happened was clearly that they wanted to make the issue around South Africa just being that of race. And even the organizations that funded Trans-Africa got uncomfortable in talking about South Africa from an economic perspective and addressing economic justice. And so for Trans-Africa to continue to get money after Nelson Mandela got out of jail, it was kind of a thing of you didn't just talk about the race issue and not deal with the economic piece, or the money would dry up, and it did.
And that sounds like what had happened. And you look at the timeline. How are we able to resist that? Because we want to take these lessons and extrapolate these lessons from the rise and fall of Trans-Africa and the legacy of Randall Robinson. How can one free themselves when we are beholden to the golden rule? And how was even someone as powerful as Randall Robinson's board was, with the likes of Mr. Belafonte, the likes of Danny Glover, and the backing of Methodist Church, all of those people were in play, weren't strong enough to stand up to the divestment that you were describing?
Well, I think one of the things we have to keep in mind was that there was a new energy that came in that kind of funded Randall's work. They had nothing to do with South Africa. And that entity was what was going on in Haiti. And it's another part of the world that I focused my attention on. I first got involved with Haiti back in the 70s, right around the time I was doing the work around Southern Africa. And there was an office down on Capitol Hill called the Washington Office on Haiti. And I worked with them, and I got a chance to meet some of the political prisoners that had been put in jail by Baby Doc and Papa Doc in the 70s. And so I got to meet some of the people in the leadership of the struggle against the Duvaliers, and became interested in what was happening in Haiti. Well, my first time visiting Haiti was in 1995, and I must share that I find myself being at the right place at the right time when and putting dots together before I even recognized how important those dots were. In 1994, I was working with a gentleman by the name of Ron Daniels, and we put together a conference.
Dr. Ron Daniels, the
Dr.
mighty Ron
At that
Daniels.
time, he wasn't a doctor, but they put together a conference in Baltimore, and the keynote speaker was the head of the peasant movement of Haiti, a gentleman by the name of Siobhan Jean-Baptiste. And I knew a person who played a major role in getting Siobhan Jean-Baptiste to come to the conference, and his name was Marx Aristide. And so at the conference, Siobhan gave his presentation. Of course, at that time, he did not speak much English, so it was being translated by Marx Aristide. And then he requested to meet with us after the conference that night in one of our hotel rooms. And as we met in the hotel room, he invited us to come to Haiti ourselves to see what's going on in Haiti. And Siobhan had played a major role in the original Lavalas party of Haiti that brought, as their presidential candidate to office in the election of 1990, a gentleman by the name of Jean-Bertrand Aristide. So in 1995, we organized a delegation of about 16 people or 18 people to go to Haiti. And it was my first visit to Haiti. Now, what was interesting was that there was a sister who had gone to Howard back in the 70s from Haiti, who I knew. And I knew that she had gone back into Haiti in the early 80s. And I had lost all contacts with her, but I knew she played a major role in the movement. So when I got down to Haiti and we were at the hotel, I asked some of the members of the movement that they knew who the sister was, and they said yes. And I said, could you get a message to her and let her know that I'm in town and I'm at this hotel? And they said, okay. So a few hours later, she shows up at the hotel with a 9mm gun on her belt and a bodyguard with a shotgun. And I'm like, whoa, what's going on?
Welcome to Haiti.
And she said that she at the time her official role was the president of the National Electoral Council for Haiti. And where we were there the first week of June, the last week of June was national elections. And so I asked her if she would go to the delegation, go over to where the delegation was and explain to them about the election process. And she agreed to do that. And when she finished explaining to them about the election process, she grabs me by the hand, pulls me to the side, and she says, Paul, you are going to come back at the end of the month to be an international observer to the election. And I'm thinking to myself, I just spent most of my money to get down here this time, in the beginning of this month. No. I'm not sure how I'm going to get the money to get back down at the end of the month. I said, I'll see what I can do. And I was fortunate enough to get the resources to buy a ticket to come back down to Haiti the last week of the month for the election to be an international observer. And it was my first opportunity to be an international observer in an election, in a national election. Well, my flight to come down to Haiti got delayed by a day. So when I actually got to Haiti, it was actually the day before the election. So I go straight from the airport up to the National Electoral Council. And as I'm walking down the walkway to the front door, there's two guys standing outside with shotguns. And so I gave them the name of the woman who was the president. And one guy walked in with a shotgun and came back out and asked me to come inside with him. So I came inside and she asked me if I had 2 passport pictures so she could give me my credentials. And I said, well, I don't have the passport pictures. I didn't know I needed them. So then I went out to my cab driver. He gives me a ride downtown to Port-au-Prince. I get my pictures. I come back up. I get my credentials. So then she asked me, where was I planning on observing? Well, being the fact that I only spent a week there, the first week of June, I didn't know Port-au-Prince that well, let alone knowing where I was going to be observing an election. So I said, I'm not really sure. She says, well, we need somebody at the national headquarters. We need an international observer, somebody we can trust. So would you be willing to be that observer? And I said, I'm willing to do whatever is necessary to do my part in helping out in this election. So I ended up spending a night on a table at the office of the National Electoral Council, only to be woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Doing what's necessary.
That's correct. So 4 o'clock in the morning, I get awakened, and they said, Paul, we need you to go observe something. And I'm like, okay. So I get out this straight. I go out to the pickup truck. The driver's got his 9mm. The president of the Electoral Council, she's there with her 9mm. Another member of the National Electoral Council, he's there with his 9mm, and the bodyguard's there with his shotgun. I'm the only one there not packing. And we go downtown, Port-au-Prince. What had happened was the gentleman that was responsible for the whole political district around Port-au-Prince and the surrounding areas had told them at 11 o'clock that night before that he had gotten all the materials out to all the polls. Only to call him back at 4 in the morning and say that he hadn't done any of that, and that he needed 16 vehicles if he was going to get all the materials out to the polls by 6 in the morning, when the polls were supposed to open. And so they figured this guy's sabotaging, trying to sabotage the election. So they're going down to confront him to get him to sign a letter saying that he didn't request transportation until 4 in the morning. So we get down to downtown Port-au-Prince. We go up this old building to the second floor. His office desk is on the opposite side of the room from the door. And I sat in a chair halfway across the room. She and the other member from the National Electoral Council goes over to this guy's desk. Of course, he's got his own bodyguards behind him. And they're arguing in Creole, which if someone said duck, I wouldn't know what they meant. They're arguing back and forth in the Creole about this guy signing a letter saying that he didn't request this information until 4 in the morning. And the guy sitting there with his hands crossed, shaking his head, no. All of a sudden, the guy from the National Electoral Council...
He's refusing to sign.
I'm sorry?
He's refusing to sign.
He's refusing to sign. So the guy from the National Electoral Council stands up, reaches in his belt, pulls his 9mm out, and slams it on the desk. And I'm thinking to myself, oh man, what's going on here? I never saw someone grab a pen and sign their name so fast in my life. Okay? Now they grab the paper that he's just signed, and they start walking towards the door. Now I'm already halfway across the room, so I get up, I turn around, I go out the door, and I don't think I hit 2 steps between the second floor and the first floor. And I'm out towards the truck. I'm sitting there waiting for them when they get to the truck. And I'm thinking to myself, I got all we got here to get shot. And so that was my first experience as being an international observer to an election.
Who was president at the time in Haiti when you was there?
This was the year that because Aristide, who became president, he got elected in 1990. He officially took office in 91. He left office in February of 96. Okay, so he had a 5-year term.
These are Clinton years.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, one thing I have to keep in mind to share with you is that when we were there the first week of June, you got to understand that there's U.S. military troops there, there's Canadian military troops there, there's French military troops there.
All in Haiti.
All in Haiti, and we got to go through these checkpoints once we moved around Port-au-Prince. We got to get stopped by these military people who were asking us for IDs and all this kind of stuff. So one of the members of the delegation says, we need to meet with the U.S. ambassador. I'm like, oh my gosh. And so none of them spoke up, yeah, we need to meet with the U.S. ambassador. So we ended up agreeing to try to set the meeting up, which we did. We go to the U.S. Embassy the next day. They take us up to the second floor, put us in a conference room. It's got a long table, so the delegations are on both sides of the long part of the table. I go sit at the far end of the table, and the ambassador walks in. He sits at the opposite far end, the part closest to the door. And the delegates started asking them questions, because at first I decided I didn't want to ask this man anything. I just want to get out the building. But as I'm listening to him answer their questions, it became clear to me that this guy was more than a U.S. ambassador. And I encourage the listening audience, look up this guy's name. His name is William Swing, like a swing on a tree. William Swing. Because on the website, they will tell you his history in the U.S. State Department. So my question to him was, what is your history in the State Department? When this man gave me his history in the State Department, it was clear. This guy was CIA. He was in Liberia with Samuel Doe, when there was a military coup with Samuel Doe. He was sent from Liberia down to South Africa when they announced they were going to let Nelson Mandela out of jail. What most people don't understand was while the apartheid regime was still in power, the United States had the apartheid regime spend all the money in the budget. So that when Mandela was going to come into office, he had no money. Now you have the largest, most powerful, modernized military in Africa, run by white folk. And now Mandela's going to become the president and he can't pay them? Okay, so it was a situation pretty much forcing Mandela's hand to have to negotiate to get the loans necessary to stop a bloodbath. Okay?
Yeah, I always say that, if, because there's a lot of people disappointed in Madiba. I do think that he did throw Winnie Mandela under the bus. I do think that the falling short of addressing the economic realities in South Africa was a problem. No redistribution of the wealth, the mines still being owned, and all that. But you don't go out of prison doing 27 years and become president without some compromises. And he made some unfortunate compromises. And I can't judge him, because what would you have done if you was dead 27 years and said, well, you allowed to come out of prison and you become president, but you got to agree to these terms. Because South Africa, correct me if I'm wrong, they had nuclear weapons when there was a apartheid country. But when Mandela came out, they ain't got no nuclear weapons no more.
Right, he got rid of them. But here's the other thing to keep in mind was that he leaves South Africa after he set out for Mandela to fail. He goes to Nigeria. That's when Abacha did the military coup in Nigeria.
We're talking about Mr. William Swing, right?
William Swing. Then he leaves Nigeria and goes to Haiti when Aristide is taken to Haiti in 1994. Okay? I'm in Haiti in 1998, and I asked a Haitian friend, what's William Swing up to nowadays? And guess what the response was? Oh, he's not here anymore. Well, where is he? He's in the Congo. When the United States was starting its second war in the Congo. The first war they started was in 96 to get Mobutu out of power because they knew Mobutu would not accept the cheap prices the United States wanted to pay for the coltan and the cobalt.
For those who are unaware, coltan and cobalt, this is what makes necessary electronic products happen. There's a reason why cell phones went from gigantic VCR size contraptions to the thing that fits in your pocket now. We all are privy to that, and unfortunately there's been a civil war in Congo. Everywhere there are, destabilized governments, those resources have been exploited for the benefit of those outside of that war area.
So here he is going, so in after they brought in Laurent Kabila and put him in power to replace Mobutu in 97, Laurent Kabila realized that Uganda and Rwanda was stealing more minerals out of the Congo and selling it on the international market. then he was able to sell on the international market, so he told Uganda and Rwanda to go home. And when that happened in 1998, the United States decided that they had to get rid of Lauren Kabila. So they sent William Swing to become the ambassador of the Congo in 1998. And Lauren Kabila was smart enough to develop a relationship with the Southern African Economic Group of the different countries in Southern Africa. And when he realized that Uganda and Rwanda was brought to the central part of the Congo, he then picked up the phone, he called Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe sent his Air Force to the Congo. He called Sam Njomo in Namibia. Sam Njomo sent his military to the Congo. And he called Santos in Angola, and they sent their military to the Congo. Of course, you're looking at Uganda and Rwanda, two very small countries with very small militaries. So those three countries combined whipped their butts of Uganda and Rwanda in very little short time. Now, as I mentioned before, I was the co-founder of the anti-apartheid movement, and I worked with the UN rep from Namibia, SWAPO rep. And this name was Theo Ben-Guerre. When Namibia got its independence, Theo Ben-Guerre became the prime minister of Namibia. So when the Namibian troops went to the Congo, he went with them. And he told me this out of his own mouth, that after they defeated the troops of Uganda and Rwanda in the central part of the Congo, and the big question was, how did they get from the eastern part of the Congo to the central part of the Congo when there are no roads? He found out. How did they get there? While he and the ambassador, the prime minister of Zimbabwe, were trying to figure out how to deal with these troops, because now under international law, they're responsible for the troops after they defeat them until they go home. They get a phone call from a woman by the name of Madeleine Albright. I don't know if anybody ever heard that name before.
Madeleine Albright's
Bill Clinton's
is famous
Secretary
for
of
saying that there was 1 million children that was killed because of U.S. sanctions in Iraq. Was it worth it? And she says, yes, I believe it was worth it. That's Madeleine Albright.
Correct.
May she burn in hell.
Okay, so I'm hearing from the horse's mouth that the United States knew where the troops were because they brought them there by aircraft in 1998. And now they asked him for permission to bring the same aircraft over there to pick them up and take them home. And he said to me that was probably the worst decision he ever made in his career. Because once the troops went back home, what the United States was really interested in were the minerals on the eastern part of the Congo next to the borders of Uganda and Rwanda. So from 1996 to 2006, the United States estimated that the troops from Uganda and Rwanda killed over 6 million Congolese in the eastern part of the Congo.
6 million Congolese have been killed doing this.
Oh,
6 million.
6 million. And out of the 6 million, 3 million of them were children below the age of 5. So in no way could you define them as enemy combatants. Our tax dollars pay for that. And for those who want to define themselves as Democrats, most of that killing happened under the Clinton administration. For those of you who want to define yourselves as Republicans,
And Rwanda.
yeah,
But 6 million, I didn't even know that.
6 million. That was just in those 10 years. Now, if you count up to today, you're probably between 9 to 12 million people have been killed.
That is more than the Jewish Holocaust.
That's correct. And as bad as the Jewish Holocaust was, that happened over 70 years ago. We can't change that. What's going on in Congo today, we can change. We can bring an end to the absolute slaughter of women and children and men, just so that the U.S. corporations can steal the minerals For who? For IBM, for Samsung, for Google, for Apple. You know, those are the minerals, because you know, with coltan, allowed electronic instruments to operate without having to have an electric fan. If you remember the old tabletop computer towers, they all had fans on them because electronics needed to be cooled off. Coltan is the reason why you don't need a fan on your cell phone today. And 64% of all the coltan in the world is in the Democratic Republic of the Congo on the eastern part next to the borders of Uganda and Rwanda. Rwanda does not have coltan, but yet it does have a coltan refinery plant. Now, I wonder where they're getting the coltan from. It is clear right now they have troops from Rwanda in the Congo killing people and stealing coltan and bringing it back across the border. And then we have the nerve to have media run around talking about the great economic miracle of Rwanda. That's like talking about the economic miracle of Hitler. It's economic miracle because they're robbing the living daylights out of their neighbors. The Democratic Republic of the Congo. So we need to be clear as to how this system works. And so to get back to Randall and Trans-Africa, when there was no need to continue to control the narrative of South Africa because Nelson Mandela was the president of South Africa, and so everybody was told we didn't have to worry about anything else in South Africa. Mandela's the president. Trans-Africa lost a great deal of the funding they were getting before. And I think Trans-Africa had gotten kind of used to their high income. And so when there was need to have to do some belt tightening, a number of people walked away.
And I'm wondering, but they was able to purchase a building.
They did purchase a building. I mean, in their heyday, they purchased a building that was a former embassy right there on New Hampshire Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was New Hampshire and all.
Yeah, definitely are. I remember that as a visitor.
But then they were forced to have to sell it.
There was forced to sell it. So Bill Fletcher says that their financial straits were awry when he took over. So the beginning of the end had already started before.
The beginning of the end had already started, but you have to keep in mind a few other things that happened. The new economic miracle for Trans-Africa was a gentleman by the name of John Bertrand Aristide. And as I've already explained to you, I spent some time in Haiti. In fact, since 1995, I've probably been to Haiti at least 20 times. And let me explain what happened while Aristide was in exile. When the United States ordered the military of Haiti to overthrow Aristide, they were very clear in telling the military of Haiti to make sure that they killed Aristide. And the Cedros, who was the head of the generals in Haiti, assigned the general to go find Aristide and kill him. For Cedros, this particular general happened to believe in the Haitian military, Haitian constitution. So when he found Aristide, rather than kill Aristide, he took Aristide to the Venezuelan embassy, and the Venezuelan embassy gave Aristide an asylum. Unbeknown to the United States during this time, the Haitian ambassador had called for a special meeting with the Security Council on Haiti once he found out about the coup. And they put together a resolution in which the resolution said the only legitimate spokesperson for the government of Haiti would be Aristide. Now, the United States, thinking that the military did what they told them to do, they voted for the resolution. And that ended up coming back and biting the United States. Now, how did it bite the United States? Well, at that time in Haiti, they had no cell phone companies. And the only phone company in the country was owned by the National Bank of Haiti, which meant it was a part of the national government of Haiti. And what the United States was doing was taking the remittance for the international phone calls coming from Haiti, the collect calls coming from Haiti, and taking that money from the phone companies here and sending it back to the Haitian military. So Aristide went to court and argued the point that even the United States agreed at the UN level that he was the only legitimate spokesperson for the government of Haiti, and as being the only legitimate spokesperson for the government of Haiti, he felt the money needed to come to him and not go to the military. And the U.S. courts ended up agreeing. So all of a sudden, Aristide's getting about $35 million a month from just those international phone calls alone. And of course, the United States was saying, before we give you the money, this much money is owed in payments to the United States, and we're going to deduct that from the money. But still, he was getting a considerable amount of income. The result of that was by the time Aristide went back into Haiti in 1994, because we're talking about from 91 to 94, Aristide had an interesting, nice, fat bank account. And what Aristide wanted to do was to get back in power. Now, under the Haitian Constitution, no president can run consecutive terms. So Aristide knew that in 1996, in February of 1996, he no longer would be president of Haiti. And he also knew that since he had decided to pocket the money, members of the different movements in Lavalas was not going to support his candidacy as president again in the year 2000, since he kept the money and didn't use the money for rebuilding of Haiti. So what Aristide, when he got back in 94, started doing was cutting deals with the national bourgeoisie of Haiti. And he became very close friends with people like Andy Pay and the Views and other rich Haitians who had their own factories inside of Haiti. So, but Aristide now needs to have a mouthpiece or two to protect his viewpoint on Haiti here in the United States. So, what did Aristide do? He looked at Trans-Africa. He looked at a woman by the name of Maxine Waters, who was a congresswoman out of South LA. And Aristide was smart enough to know not to pay directly the people that he needed to have to be his spokespeople. So he paid Maxine's husband, I think it was like $300,000 a year. And so every time that Maxine got a chance to get near any type of reporter's microphone, she's talking about Aristide needs to be returned to Haiti. And he hired Randall's wife, Hazel, to become the chief lobbyist for Haiti. And I encourage anybody It's public information, because when you are speaking on behalf of another government in the United States, every penny you get from that government must be registered at the Department of Justice under your name and the name of the country that paid you.
Yeah, real quick footnote, Proswell, Michelle, from the Grammy Award winning Fugees, learned that the hard way, because he's looking at 20 years for not doing what you just, he wasn't the target, it was a Chinese, it was Chinese national? I don't know if he's Chinese, I think it's Taiwan. But anyway, they were using this billionaire's money trying to sway elections in America, gave Obama a bunch of money. So they was actually after the Asian guy. He's back in his country. They don't have no extradition. They can't get him. And he Prize from Fugees was like the go-between guy, you know, because it's cool to have a hip hop artist around and introduce you to all these celebrities. And he's looking at 20 years right now for not disclosing, you know. But yet, if you are Supreme Court justice, you ain't got to disclose nothing. You ain't got to disclose nothing.
Right.
You know, you're a real life NFT, as they said at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. But I hate to interrupt, but that's very real.
Yeah.
And you're going to ruffle some feathers and step on toes with what you just acknowledged in terms of Auntie Maxine and Randall's legacy. But this is the reality
again,
that we
you
have
will
to
not find
acknowledge.
Randall's name on there because it's under Hazel. You won't find Maxine's name on there, but you will find it under her husband's name, which his last name is not Waters. I don't know what his name is, but it's registered under his name. And so Aristide was in a position to spread some money around because his goal was to become president again of Haiti in 2000, and that he wanted to be able to do that. And so he aligned himself with the National Bourgeoisie of Haiti and worked to control the National Electoral Council of Haiti to pretty much endorse his ability to be able to become president in 2000. I was an observer to that election in 2000. The interesting thing was in 2000, there were two elections. You may remember there was an election here in the United States.
If it was ever election stolen, that would have been it.
And what he realized was that the House of Representatives was taken over by Republicans, the Senate was taken over by Republicans, and the Supreme Court in December of 2000 said that the president would be George Bush. So all this money that he had invested in Democrats, Maxine, Randall, whatever, wasn't going to help him. Because one of the things he wanted to do was, Bill Clinton had cut off the financial aid that the U.S. government was giving to Haiti, and he wanted it back. So the result of that was that he sent an envoy up to meet with a guy by the name of Colin Powell. And Colin Powell said, well, if you want aid, this is what we want. We want you to build an enterprise zone. And for those who don't know what an enterprise zone is, that is a piece of land that has no domestic jurisdiction. Meaning that even though it's on Haitian land, Haiti does not control that piece of land. And in that piece of land, only foreigners can set up manufacturing in that land. And they pay no taxes to Haiti, and they pay no taxes to the United States to import whatever they manufacture. And so basically, Aristide, by agreeing to do that, pissed off the national bourgeoisie of Haiti because they're in the rest of the part of Haiti that they had to pay taxes. And now they're competing with international factories that don't have to pay taxes. And that happened because Aristide allowed it to happen. And so you end up having already the rank and file movements of Haiti who had taken exception to Aristide in the first place, began to build coalitions even with the national bourgeoisie of Haiti, because they both were pissed off at Aristide. Now, what do you have going on then? Well, the United States recognized that the momentum now is really building inside of Haiti against Aristide. Because where in the movement doesn't have a whole lot of money, the national bourgeoisie does. And if they're willing to put money together to build national demonstrations and stuff against Aristide, then that really creates a problem for the U.S. bourgeoisie. Because that challenges the ability of Aristide in controlling the country. And by 2004, it was clear that the momentum was going to continue to grow and that Aristide was not going to be in office much longer. So, the move was, how does the United States take back control of Haiti? And their conclusion was they had to remove Aristide. Now let's keep in mind, let us call it a military coup in 2004. And I guess if we were going to call it in 2004 a military coup, then we need to call it a military coup also took place back in 1987 when Baby Doc was taken out of office as well. Because Baby Doc didn't want to leave Haiti, but the United States sent its Air Force down there and told Baby Doc, take whatever money you got in the central bank you want, but you butts getting on this plane and we're going to take you over to southern France. I encourage people to look at the homework, do your homework, and I'll give you a source that you may feel comfortable in accepting the information. It's called Democracy Now!, hosted by a woman by the name of Amy Goodman, who was very proud of the fact that she flew over to the Central African Republic to pick up Aristide. Look up her interview with Aristide and listen to it very clearly as to what Aristide had to say. Aristide was removed from Haiti in February of 2004 and taken to the Central African Republic. Now, when he was removed from Haiti in 2004, Aristide had his own private bodyguards. And it was the company that controlled his bodyguards was called the Steele Foundation, S-T-E-E-L-E Foundation. So when you go to Democracy Now!, go to the search engine and look up Steele Foundation, because Amy actually interviewed the president of the Steele Foundation. And one of the things she stated about the Steele Foundation was that when they were the bodyguards of Aristide, they had contracts with the DOD, Department of Defense, and the CIA at the same time. But not only that, when the United States took Aristide out on the private jet to the Central African Republic, they allowed the Steele Foundation bodyguards to go with Aristide. Okay? So the question we have to ask ourselves, how much did they feel threatened by Aristide that they would allow his own bodyguards to travel with him as they took him out of the country? The second point was they took him to the Central African Republic. Where in the Central African Republic did Aristide stay? If you listen to the interview that Amy had with Aristide as they're flying back from the Central African Republic, Aristide, out of his own mouth, said he stayed at the presidential palace of the Central African Republic. Now, let's think of some other military coups the United States had. Let's look at Iraq. Did the United States put Saddam Hussein in somebody's presidential palace to stay? I don't think so. From my memory, he was picked up out of the middle of a hole in the ground. So, if the United States was in opposition to Aristide, they would not have taken him with his bodyguards to the Central African Republic and deposited Aristide and his family at the presidential palace of the Central African Republic. And if you look at the history of the Central African Republic, you will find that just the year before, the elected government of the Central African Republic was overthrown and a French-led military coup in the Central African Republic, and that the person acting as president of the Central African Republic was a general who led that coup on behalf of France. So, why did they get rid of Aristide? It's simple. They figured if they didn't take care of Aristide, if they didn't take him out of there, the people of Haiti would have taken him out of there, and the United States would have lost control over Haiti. But by removing Aristide from Haiti, the United States could justify the French, the Canadian, and U.S. troops coming into Haiti and running the country. But there are videos on YouTube showing the people's reaction to Aristide leaving Haiti, in which they went up onto the billboards that had these, dictators have a habit of putting their faces everywhere on billboards, and where they ripped down the posters of Aristide, with literally thousands and thousands of Haitians cheering as these posters are getting ripped off of the billboards. And so you have to ask yourself the question, and I would encourage you to Google it. TransAfrica was in bankruptcy when Randall left here. Google. I did ask you to do it, right?
Yes, your homework assignment, Bob.
Okay, and would you please share?
That I did not do, Bob. So you have to tell the audience what happened.
Did you Google it?
No, sir.
Okay, well, if you Google the worth of Randall Robinson, you will find out he's worth over $5 million. Now here's a man who left an organization that was in bankruptcy. And today his family's worth $5 million. Where did the $5 million come from? And I would dare say it came from the work he did on behalf of Aristide. If you look up the name of Aristide's lawyer, you'll probably see that he's probably worth about $13 million. And if you look up the worth of Aristide today, you will find out he's worth over $800 million. Now, did he make the $800 million from being president of Haiti, or did he make it from being a priest? Okay?
So we have him deposited in a puppet of the West in the Central African Republic in Africa. And then we have Baba Randall Robinson, Auntie Maxine Waters, charter a private plane
Well, Aristide actually chartered the plane. His lawyer chartered the plane
His
on
daughter's
his
right.
behalf.
And they go over. Amy Gooden is on the plane with them.
Oh, let's start the whole where the plane did. The plane came to the United States, picked up Randall, picked up Maxine, picked up Amy, flew down to Jamaica, picked up a member of the National Assembly of Jamaica, then flew from the Jamaica over to the Central African Republic. Refueled, picked up Aristide and his family. So let's count the numbers here. You know, the plane has to be big enough to have handled probably an entourage of 15 to 20 people. That's not a cheap flight at all. So you have to ask the question, who paid for it? Because you don't charter that kind of flight without putting the money up in the bank first in an escrow account. So someone had enough money to put at least $1 million or two in an escrow account for this plane to do all what it did. And then they picked him up from the Central African Republic, got permission from the United States to bring him back to Jamaica.
But it was, at the time, Paul, it was not presented to us that this was with the permission of the United States. It was presented to us as if it was in defiance of the United States, and that somehow Maxine's presence, and perhaps even the Jamaican official as well, was there to prevent the plane from being shot down or somehow, because this was supposed to be, it was presented to us that this was a dangerous mission, and they was there for the safeguarding to prevent the plane from being shot down. That's what was presented to us.
I would say this. I would say this. First thing, you're in the Central African Republic, a former French colony. So United States really don't have much at all to say about what happens in the Central African Republic. The general who's the head of the military coup of the Central African Republic, and maybe France may have something to say about it, but a U.S. politician has very little to say about what happens over there in the Central African Republic. Okay? Now, maybe had they been in Puerto Rico, yes, Maxine may have played a role in that. Randall may have played a role in that because that's U.S. control. Central African Republic, United States technically have no control over that. That's a French former colony in which the French had organized a military coup, in which the general of the army of the Central African Republic was acting as president. So, U.S. ain't, trust me, United States don't really have anything to say about that. Now, maybe France may have said something about that, but not the U.S. But I didn't see anybody from France on that plane. Okay? And again, the bottom line was, who paid for it? Where did the money come from? Who had $1 million to put into an escrow account to lease the jet to fly, make multiple stops in the United States, go to Jamaica, refuel, fly to the Central African Republic, refuel, okay, and then fly back here. Fly back to Jamaica, refuel, then fly back to the United States. Where did the money come from? Who paid for it? You know, I mean, these are questions I think people should ask. You know, and the point is that Amy, everything I just got through describing is on the Marcus E. Nouns archives. She described how the plane traveled, where they went, where they stopped. And then she also, you listened to her interview with Aristide, listened to her interview with the head of the Steele Foundation, which was a mercenary organization that had contracts with the DOD and the CIA at the same time they were the personal bodyguards of Aristide.
Protecting their asset.
Huh?
Protecting their asset.
Of course.
So this is the complicated history that we have to deal with. Much like Madiba had made some unfortunate compromises, Barbara Randall apparently made some unfortunate compromises. Maxine, but how is it?
But they also got paid.
But they also got paid. How is it that we're not able to have a critical lens applied to people we admire? It's very unusual for us to have that type of critical analysis. For example, Harry Belafonte famously said that during the height of the anti-apartheid movement, he had tried unsuccessfully numerous times to get on Oprah Winfrey's show to talk about the anti-apartheid movement, and was rejected. But as soon as Madiba comes home and is safe to, he's been celebrated now, because he was still a terrorist because of America was concerned. But now he's safe to celebrate. Then she opens the interview for Nelson to come on her show. So this Harry Belafonte said it out of his mouth. Oprah Winfrey refused to have Mr. Belafonte on to talk about the anti-apartheid movement.
Correct.
That's this is no diss. That's just a reality.
But again, you have to understand, Oprah's first responsibility, the way she sees it, is making her money. Let's call it for what it is. Her big first number one priority is making her money. Now, to make her money, she's got to have certain advertisers that's willing to advertise on her show so she can make her money. And so she's not going to jeopardize her relationship with her advertisers, with the company she's going to have buying ads for her show. So when they say it's okay, then it's okay.
The golden rule.
It is what it is.
The golden rule. Well, they don't make them like they used to, do they? Malcolm X had a tape that he recorded secretly when the FBI came to visit him at home. Have y'all heard that?
Yeah.
He came to his house and they offered him, what they call it, 30 bags of silver, 30 pieces of silver, and he rebuffed it. And then they basically acknowledged that we have other ways, and know what they deal with. Martin Luther King was not compromising on that. They don't make them like that anymore. Where is it going to take as we bring
Well,
this
let's put it
to
this
a
way.
close?
You will not get it on TV. They make them, but they're not going to show you those people on
So
TV.
we do have stand-up people, much like yourself, and I hope to be as well. But we're not going to be on CNN now.
You're not going to be on CNN.
The revolution will not be televised, but
Certainly won't be on MSNBC.
But we'll be recording a live stream here at Sankofa as soon as we get a more reliable internet, so we can live stream uninterrupted. But we was recorded today here at Sankofa. I've been talking with Paul Pumphrey from the Black Alliance for Peace, with his critical lens being applied to the legacy of Randall Robinson and the rise and fall of Trans
And if I
Africa.
may, I'll also say
Please.
that I'm a co-founder of Friends of the Congo.
Absolutely, and I think that we're gonna have to do a separate conversation and do a deep dive on Congo and what we need to do. In fact, you was there when we had Patrice Lumumba's son in my home, and I attempted to cook, and I'm so glad I didn't poison anybody. But I'm very unsettled by that number. I knew that there was a civil war. I knew there was been destabilized. I knew that atrocities was being committed. But to hear that number is unsettling, and I think that we need to do more to address that.
In fact, if someone would like to get just a short video, it's called Crisis in the Congo. It's on YouTube.
Crisis in the Congo.
And I think the other one is called Congo in a Nutshell. Congo in a Nutshell, I think it's less than 3.5 minutes. But but it goes into the numbers of what's going on in the Congo. And crisis in the Congo is probably about 45 minutes.
I will be sure to follow up on that homework assignment, Bob, Paul. So this is Timon Freeman. We at Radio, broadcasting live in Sankofa Video and Bookstore on Georgia Avenue across from Howard University. Paul, you want to share any information that people can support your work?
Well, again, I encourage people who may be interested in what's going on in the Congo by going to friendsofthecongo.org. That's friends with an S of the Congo.org. We have a tremendous amount of information on our website, and we constantly try to keep it updated on a regular basis. I found by me doing my other work in Haiti, I found out about Weird Swing. My work I did on the Congo, I found out a lot of things about how the U.S. functions. The work I did on Southern Africa by knowing Theo Ben-Guerev. He personally telling me that it was Madeleine Albright calling for Commission of Air Rights to send cargo planes in to pick up the troops from Uganda, Rwanda. It's you know, when you get involved with the struggle for change, you'd be surprised where it may take you.
Down the rabbit hole?
Yeah, I mean, really, I had no idea that I would be in a position where, by doing the work around Southern Africa and knowing Theo Ben-Guerev, I might give you a little short story with that. When Namibia got its independence after the Angolan War, Ben went back to Namibia to be the Prime Minister of Namibia. In 2000, I called his embassy to get his phone number in Windhoek, and the woman says, he's not in Windhoek. Your Prime Minister is not their capital. Where is he? She said he's in New York. I'm like, well, what's he doing in New York? She said, well, last year the General Assembly voted him in as President of the General Assembly. I'm like, oh, okay. So I go on the internet, I get the phone number to the office of the President of the General Assembly, I call it up. Secretary answers the phone, Office of the President. I said, yes, my name is Paul Pumphrey. I'd like to have a meeting with the President. Here's my phone number. Could you call me back and let me know when I can meet with the President? And this is on a Monday. She says, well, sir, the President has a very tight schedule this week because at the end of the week, he'll be on international travel for 2 weeks. And stop where he can meet with you. By the way, what country do you represent? Or what organization? Like, who in the heck are you calling here asking to speak with the President? And so I gave her the name of my organization, which I knew she didn't know what that was. And I gave her my name and my phone number. I said, could you just give me a call back and let me know when I can meet with the President? Well, like I told you, sir, he has a very tight schedule this week. Stop where he can meet with you. That was Monday. Tuesday morning, I get a phone call. Hello, Mr. Paul Pumphrey? Yes. This is the office of the President. The President said he can meet with you tomorrow at 11 o'clock. My response to her was, well, you know, I have a very tight schedule, and I'm not sure if I can make it there by 11 o'clock tomorrow. She said, Mr. Pumphrey, like I told you, the President has a very tight schedule. Can you be here tomorrow by 11 o'clock? I said, I'll be there. But I figured I had to give her a little bit of home medicine. So I go up to New York, and a mutual friend of Ben and mine actually has a condo right across the street from the main entrance of the UN. So I'm like, wow, I haven't seen him for a while. I better give him a call, let him know I'm in town. I don't want him seeing me, and I had not called him ahead of time, let him know I'm in town. So I call the guy out, and the first thing he says to me is, Paul, what you doing come up here to meet with Ben? I'm like, how in the heck does he know I'm meeting with Ben? So I said, he said, by the way, Paul, the security of the UN is drastically changed from the 70s after 9/11. And so you're going to have to be escorted back to the office. He says, I'm getting ready to go over to the UN right now. So meet me at my condo, which is straight across the street from the main entrance of the UN, and we'll go together. I said, okay. So I meet him, we walk across the street, going to the UN. He goes through the employee entrance, I'm going through the business entrance. He comes down. By this time I got my little tag around my neck, and he walks me back into the office. Well, the poor secretary now sees me walking into the office with the chief of staff. And now, she knew that evidently the president knew who I was. Theo Berev knew who I was, but now I'm walking in with the chief of staff. That poor woman never questioned me again when I called that office. If I asked where the president was, even if he was in the bathroom, she'd tell me. You know? Because obviously she figures, I don't know who this man is, but the president knows who he is, the chief of staff knows who he is. Hey, who am I to block him from these people who already know who this guy is? But yeah, so I found myself having some interesting experience. Never got a position where I had a whole lot of money, but I wasn't interested in a whole bunch of money. I was interested in a whole bunch of change.
A whole bunch of change. I like that.
And so that was my focus, not on how much money I could make. And I think that if we focus our life around making the change, you'll be surprised how many doors open up for us. How many times, I would never thought that I could go around telling somebody I know the chief of staff, the chief of staff and the president of the General Assembly from 1999 to 2000 at the UN. But I did. And when I'm in South Africa, there I stay at Nelson Mandela's granddaughter's house. But I do. We must, in my opinion, we must do what we find to be right. Not because we're looking for financial reward, but because it's right and it's just. And I found that when you do that, doors open up like you would never believe. So on that note, I want to thank you very much.
I want to thank you and publicly thank you because you're responsible for sponsoring me for my trip to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I try to do my best.
You're doing a good job. We're making change. We're making change.
Since I had a few contacts there, and I knew that you play an important role getting information out, that I would use my contacts as a means of making that possible for you.
Yeah, and that was a tremendous lesson. It was right before the pandemic too, so it was great, and it was instrumental in my development as a writer and getting my work done. So thank you again. I just want to give this quote dedicated to you, Mr. Paul. The planet doesn't need more successful people. The planet desperately needs more peacemakers, healers, restorers, storytellers, and lovers of all kinds. That's the change I think that you're invoking here today. And thank you for joining me for this difficult conversation about the rise and fall of Trans-Africa, the legacy of Randall Robinson. We urge people to do their homework as Bob has challenged us to do, to educate ourselves so we can have that critical lens and analysis to figures of our day so that we won't be blindly falling behind those without having the information. And then quote Randall Robinson, he says, "What you don't know can kill you."
And may I say this also, and that for those who want to ask me more questions, I'll give you my personal email address, which is my name, Paul, P-A-U-L, dot Humphrey, that's P as in Paul, U-M, P as in Paul, H-R-E-Y, @gmail.com. And I will send you some of the links that I talked about today, and you can do the research for yourself.
And with that, thank you for subscribing to We Act Radio's YouTube channel. Do something. Whew. Thank you, guys. Keep on. Keep on. Keep on.
Keep on.
Yes, sir.
What's the name?